Behold Jerusalem. Found. The zodiacal miracle in the map of Britain and Northern Ireland and its message for our time. By Graham K. Griffiths. Chapter 6 Virgo. Oh, to be swallowed by the goddess. I am the first and the last. I am the honored one and the scorned one. I am the whore, and the holy one. I am the wife and the virgin. I am the mother and the daughter. I am she whose wedding is great, and have not taken a husband. I am knowledge and ignorance. I am shameless, I am ashamed. I am strength and I am fear. I am foolish, and I am wise. I am godless, and I am one whose God is great. Gnostic text discovered at Nag Hammadi entitled Thunder, Perfect Mind. The poem is intended as being spoken by the voice of the divine feminine force. General area, the bulk of North and Mid Wales. Her head is the Isle of Anglesey, while her feet are as far south as Cardigan and Merthyr Tydfil. I would hazard a guess that anyone who has bothered to come this far upon this strange journey has, for some time, felt ill at ease with the state of our poor palpitating planet and the destructive course upon which mankind seems hell-bent on keeping it. That ghastly hole in the ozone layer, and the rate at which the ice shelf is turning to slush, are providing ample grounds for such concerns. You might also be troubled by our tampering with genetics and feel we are playing fast and loose with what Prince Charles has rightly termed the building bricks of life. You may feel that we have already unbalanced nature to a point where some kind of backlash seems inevitable. Harboring similar feelings, and after studying for years what the land has done, I have come to read Albion's arrival, this beautiful affront to all the beliefs and values which have led to the demise of our planet and its life forms, as a mother's scream of, "Stop," to us her children. We are like hordes of delinquent gods gone mad, who arrogantly strut our greedy, couldn't give a shit stuff upon a terrible brink, to which most are utterly oblivious. And yet, behind this visual wail of nature, just see how much love there must still be in the heart of her whom we have by the throat, a love powerful enough to cause the very stones to speak to us in images that we thought were our own. For me, this wonder underfoot could only have come about via the Earth Mother and Sky Father met, as one in everything from Devon's cliffs to Cumbria's worms. This marriage, this holy fusion, has then caused a body of earth, the size of Britain, to animate itself as a picture of heaven, so think what such a union would do if celebrated within a man. This same wondrously creative and transforming potential resides latent, I believe, within us all. We have, however, become so spiritually sundered from the rest of creation that to even broach such a subject usually guarantees yawns, or embarrassed looks toward the ceiling. Indeed, as I type this I immediately squirm at what I've just written. It is hard to break out of the straitjackets of perception that our present culture shoehorned us into at birth. Sometimes, even I look at what I've found and turn absolutely chicken. Anyway, let's forget about us for a moment and return to what the land has done, and know that whatever upheavals this old planet is about to shiver through, Mother Nature will never cease her shindig of light, whether coiling through the laughter of children, or swirling within the nucleus of the furthest star of all. Look, even in the very face of continued abuse and pending catastrophe, the image that the old girl has chosen to emblazon 123 miles tall upon the face of the world is of herself dancing. Indeed, pregnant and dancing. And oh, how that word dance shall explode off Albion's cross at the end of our journey, for we shall see there even her son dance off its planks, heralding all of us doing likewise. Without doubt a great change must be coming, but because of the sheer beauty of this visual imagery, that change can only be ultimately for the best. This change is in itself a chance, and perhaps the greatest chance ever put to mankind en masse, to finally take up our rightful place in the dance of the universe. I can think of no other reason why the Earth has done this to Britain. Smile then, at her exuberant cancan of life. Smile even wider when you shift your eyes to the legs of her little sister at Glastonbury whom Mary Cain found also to be dancing beneath the green pastures there, and just check out their identical bellies. But it gets better. Take a look at her absolutely staggering look-alike at Preseli. And why shouldn't they be twins, for both these Earth Mothers are proud to be Welsh and therefore each a Ceridwen, the name given to the great goddess by the Celts of these parts. And as though to underline their Welshness, notice how both wear the same distinctively brimmed bonnet, so similar in style to the traditional black top hat worn to this day by the women of Wales. And while you're at it, just check out that identical breast too. Pure coincidence, some will sneer when faced with this treble take of ladies in the landscape, but for me it's just another day in the discovery of Albion. Once more we see all three zodiacs proving each other beyond coincidence via almost copycat imagery, even more so in this instance, for this is not the modern-day image of a laugh-like Virgo, but one who is rotund and in total accord with the Celt's own idea of the mother. 3 in 1. Virgo, the knees-up fat mama of this whole miracle, has, however, many faces, and these anciently linked to those of the moon. For instance, our ancestors saw her in the new crescent moon as the demure virgin, associated perhaps with the fragile spring, raw and yet with a subtle promise on the air, laced with the seductive scent of elder blossom, married to the yearning throat of the blackbird. The summer mother was then twin to the full moon, under whose light she was seen full pregnant and frolicking amid her multifarious births. Her swollen breasts were feeding not only all who drew breath, but also the inanimate, for, because of Albion, we know that the very rocks must be, in a sense, alive and pulsating with her rhythms. So, from sandstone to sandpipers, everything was seen to be joined in a spiritual conga, if I can put it that way. Behind her happily rolling rump, in a summer dance of riotous regeneration. Her third face came with the darkening moon, which cast her in the rags of the crone or wise woman. In this guise she was seen to be withdrawn into herself, and yet perhaps her works were more vibrant in this inner state than at any other seasonal time. She was now working deeply through the dark months, rousing her dance within the nucleus of the snowdrop, the lamb, and a myriad other life forms that do not slumber in winter, but are ever rising and spiraling back towards new birth. If only we had eyes to see the dazzling ethereal energies dancing through the bone-hard frosty soil, or in the outwardly dead oak, then winter would seem as colorful as summer. Such is the triple-faced goddess. As we witness her dancing out of Wales, see now a spectacular composite of those three made one. From the head surely cackles the crone, though in the size of those swinging breasts and belly we can also detect her bounteous summer side. But notice the legs, it can only be the motivation of the maid that is behind such dainty high-stepping jinks. In Wales we are thus privileged to look upon all her cycles dancing in one amalgam of joy, fertility, and wisdom. But what the hell am I talking about? I have just given 3 seasonal cameos with a bent towards the pagan, and thus for most readers, 3 more examples of pathetic silliness, and I would agree. Having just reread my 3-paragraph indulgence, I utterly retract my every word, for the true vision of her today, regardless of moon phase and season, would be that of her globally decapitated head stuck upon a pole and stabbed into the toxic ground, alongside both the stinking tuskless elephant carcass, and the suicide child who could not bear to fail her exams for the system had never told her that she was beautiful beyond learning. And feel sick with anger. Her wounds are our wounds. On Albion you should know, even after this short distance, that this land doesn't forget a damn thing. It is then time to see right through this mother's facade of jollifications. Observe how, for all her dancing, her throat has been slashed, indeed, she has been decapitated via the menai strait. Thus the crime of the male against the female, against all nature, is held up for all the universe to see. The land remembers everything and is a witness to history in a way we cannot fully appreciate. Encyclopedia of Celtic Wisdom. Caitlin and John Matthews. I shall speak more of this glaring and most damning wound shortly, but for now let every man, or woman, believing too much in men, admit to the crime. Since the demise of the goddess in favor of a more masculine god, or indeed, of no god at all, and greed and power became our true religion, men have set themselves triumphantly above the rest of nature. This a crime perpetrated on 2 levels. First, in denying the mineral makeup of the planet any semblance of intelligence, and only offering a grudging nod to the intelligence or self-awareness of its myriad animal, bird, insect, fish and vegetal life forms. It has been easy for generations of us to view the planet as not much more than a vast storehouse of help-yourself commodities, and these pretty well free to anyone with enough, get up and go to plunder, without searching their conscience at all. Indeed, until relatively recently, the Church itself helped matters along nicely by looking upon nature in the raw as almost evil, and therefore a thing to be cleared, cleansed, and beaten into submission, along with any native cultures that still upheld the view that a god could be in a landscape, a tree, or even a stone. But most cunning of all, because we in the Western world worked so hard at all but wiping out the usage of the word mother, as relating to the earth, we, at the same time, eliminated any worry of the planet itself ever achieving recognition as a being in its own right. In this one psychological masterstroke we gave ourselves license to bugger her, and hers by the hour without the slightest pang of remorse, for she was officially non-existent. She was a thing less than a whore, and thus we could take our pleasure of her body without the fear of having to pay a fee afterwards. You do not need me to tell you that this Western way of doing things is now pretty well prevalent across the globe. So ingrained and time-hardened has this denial and devaluation of the whole range of the feminine, mother, negative, left, black become, and so shored up the valued hierarchy of the male, father, positive, right, white principles, that one almost suspects that the great lie of it all must have become so effortlessly passed on through the genes as to warrant seeing it as a veritable natural law of the universe. Why, even today in some families, whether in the West or East, the birth of a daughter can prompt in both mother and father an unconcealed disappointment, while in some other parts of the world her arrival is almost a curse. And don't talk to me of today's leaps and bounds in women's rights, allowing them to rise to professional positions of power, to climb into pulpits, to fight alongside men in so-called theaters of war, and to go out to work while dads stay at home to look after the children. Because the real problem of feminine recognition goes down a whole lot deeper than equal job opportunities. Female liberation is for us all. On the plus side, we now find some men who value a feminine sensitivity in their character after generations of classing it a weakness. But for me, the greatest sign of the return of the feminine is in the stirring in the hearts of people of both sexes that prompts them to put their own life in danger for that of a tree in the face of a developer's bulldozer. These and many other signs, including this shocking slap in the face from Albion, are but the birth pangs of a coming new age, a new way of perceiving this whole miracle of life on Earth. Though it is not only on the outside that we've decapitated the essence of the mother. It seems that through our physical devaluing of the mother and thus the planet there has accrued an injury to the entire feminine psyche, and because, in a wiser time than this, the soul was seen as essentially feminine, the spirit being masculine. I fear that in addition to the all-too-visible physical crimes, both the soul of the planet and that of every individual man, woman, and child may have become wounded to the same degree. The symptoms of this are many-tiered, the implications vast, but often all summed up in that now widely used phrase, the soulless society. Unbalance is not only visibly ransacking nature, but it is gnawing away at every facet of human existence. And with every rise in the figures of drug users there may be hidden a far larger increase in those suffering physiological problems, due to having to exist in such an atmosphere. To stop this self-perpetuating rot, and only because of what I have read into Albion, I think we shall need a totally new way of perceiving just about everything under the sun. It will not be easy to admit that we've been so wrong on so many things. Indeed, I know it will be downright painful. Mirror, mirror on the ground. So try perceiving this, in the most simplistic terms possible. Albion, before anything else, must be showing itself to us as some kind of mirror, for aren't the heavens reflected there? With such a premise in mind, could this same vast mirror, and I include the entire surface of the earth, also be a super-sensitive reflection of us? And what if, in that same topographical mirror, our every deed and thought was somehow caught within it and thereafter reflected back a trillion times, not only back onto us, but onto the trees, upon clouds, upon our next-door neighbor, even upon our own babies? Ludicrous, you say, but if you think that, what are you doing on this journey, so far from home? I am not saying that this is a fact, because I'm no guru, but pondering on this while looking upon this growing body of evidence on the ground, forces me to concede that anything is now possible. So let's kick the impossible around a bit longer. If this crazy mirror theory is true, think of those daily and global acts of sickening aggression, think about the still starving millions, of the depressed and homeless, of the rapists' victims crying in the alleyways, think even about your own domestic angers, fears, and concerns. Then think of the loneliness of the last whales, their calls not answered, of the reflected pain of the millions of trees felled in the decimated rainforests, through to the sickening moment, and one which must have sent a shiver through the entire universe, when man even thought about putting his own genes into a pig so as to make the meat more tender and lean. Think about it all, and worry as to whether it is all being perpetually thrown back into our faces in a myriad ways. Image upon frightful image, a multiplicity of amplified sorrows and discontent which are imperceptibly leaching back into your own system, your own psyche, where even now such feedback lies decaying, subliminally dulling the true shine of your life in this never-ending two-way traffic of unbalance piled upon unbalance. Result, a global disease. New medical belief, even without going onto the dodgy ground of my planetary mirror theory, is, however, suggesting that thought and feelings really can directly affect the physical, to the extent where stressful thought can of itself cause actual harm to the body in which the condition exists, even possibly causing cancer. I put it to you that the body of the earth may be liable to the same. But all is not doom and gloom. Of course, as well as pain and unrest, a whole lot of love and laughter must also be reflected in and out of this same mirror. But I would wager that, on the world stage, the pendulum has been for a long time weighted on the side of suffering and sadness. Having said that, just imagine what wonders could jump out of this same hypothetical looking glass if we, at last, sent into it a genuine, heartfelt acknowledgement of the fact that even bedrock is alive and has a creative mind. If such credence were transmitted en masse, would we find ourselves suddenly communing with mountains and working hand in hand with nature, as joint creators of a heaven on earth? If so, we would become true lords of the earth, not as domineering plunderers, but as protective shepherds and loving gardeners. Our pulse would no more be quickened by selfish greed, but by the seasons and the revolutions of the silver above our heads. And how nature might bloom in response, knowing that its God walked again, all-seeing and knowing amongst its riches, he half-man father, half-animal mother, at last the ever-intended God-man. If ye have faith as a grain of mustard seed, ye shall say unto this mountain, remove hence to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible unto you. Matthew, chapter 17, verse 20. Seeing what the mountains of Wales have done, do not dare water down the meaning of the above. But all this is not a new theory, indeed, isn't the simple gist of its payback theory no more than the message that often ran through the advice of Jesus. Therefore all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Matthew, chapter 7 verse 12. Simply he is telling us to do good, and that good shall be returned or reflected. Likewise that phrase of, what you put in is what you get out may be truer than we ever realized. These words may become more meaningful than ever before when now we find ourselves walking over a magic mirror, as transparent as Glastonbury itself, now seen to be the glassy eye of Pisces, a place which may, in a mirror, translate as the location of the buried-looking glass. When on our journey we linger on the center of the forehead of Albion's Christ, we will also take a mirror to the place that marks this prime spot, symbolic as it is of enlightened perception, and find their Glastonbury reversed into something like, by the glass sun, the sun revealed in the looking glass. Tantalizing stuff. But if this is exactly the imagery we are supposed to see, then think whose face will shine out if you are brave enough to look into that face of the dazzling sun. Yours is going to be the answer. But, when I saw her boobs, I panicked. Out of all these zodiacal giants, Virgo is the most animated. She is certainly the one to put a smile on our faces, and why not? Creation is a joyful thing, a physical manifestation of love. Her laughing head is so clear that once it is pointed out we could be forgiven for laughing at our own stupidity for not seeing her sooner. I had first seen her when I was 11, though only her head and outstretched arm. Another 30 years were to pass before I was permitted to see that she also had a full body, a 123-mile-high figure of dancing nudity, and that's when I panicked. You see, my upbringing branded her as outrageous and irreverent, for what was holy surely should never be seen naked, let alone pregnant and exhibiting it so unashamedly. I'm certainly no prude, and only ever attended church for the obligatory weddings, christenings, and funerals, but my reaction was, I guess, based upon the sanitized Christian dogma which had been implanted in me some time somewhere, and although never impeding my life previously, it was certainly rearing its ugly head now. Judged on this criteria, what I had found must be either a misjudgment or something downright pagan, and thereby more than likely degenerate. Under such an attack, my unencumbered inner child must have had to hang on for all it was worth to urge me to draw her out as the land seemed to demand. Sheepishly, after I had been true to the map, I waited for my 2 daughters to return home from school. Fictitiously casual, and expecting frowns, I said to them, "Look who I've found, it's the Earth Mother, what do you think?" The girls' faces lit up and they giggled. But what they saw, although funny and a touch naughty, was no big deal to them. Moreover, she seemed exactly as they expected, fat, pregnant, and proud of it. It was only the narrow-minded old ghost within me, the marketing man with an eye on product acceptance, and the preacher of old-time religion, who was threatening me with that big word, blasphemy. The laughter of the girls soon made everything all right, however, and I joined in with them, thus the marketing man fled. Ashamed at having labeled innocence as possibly pornographic in the eyes of the punters, and the preacher followed him, for although he sang all things bright and beautiful, he never wanted them to be stark naked and beautiful. And tell me, if the motherland wished to portray herself dancing a naked jig of life and love, then how dare I even think about censoring it? Life is the rhythm of her conga, and its continuance via love is what Albion must be all about. It is obvious that even in her pain, the mother wishes only to send us, her children, this dance of fecundity as a visual token to hold on to and to remember her by when on a chaotic day of our own making, our intellect takes flight screaming, "There is no God." At that time, and even above the howling of the elements, she wishes us no ill, what true mother would? Words not permitted in the Bible. Jesus knew of her love and spoke of it in words not permitted in the Bible. Translated by Edmund Sekelly from ancient Aramaic manuscripts dating from the 1st century AD, come teachings, allegedly from Jesus himself, and relating specifically to the Earth Mother. These manuscripts are reportedly in the possession of both the Vatican and the Austrian government. Now whether Sekelly's translations are unerringly accurate or not, I cannot resist quoting some of these beautiful words of Jesus, for they could well come from a boy who had once come to Albion and found a mother waiting here, and in whose herb-scented arms lay a while in wonder. From Sekelly's book The Gospel of Peace of Jesus, allegedly penned by the disciple John, I offer these warming words. And he who clings to the laws of his mother, to him shall his mother cling also. She shall heal all his plagues, and he shall never become sick. She gives him long life, and protects him from all afflictions, from fire, from water, from the bite of venomous snakes. For your mother bore you, keeps life within you. She has given you her body, and none but she heals you. Happy is he who loves his mother and lies quietly in her bosom. For your mother loves you, even when you turn away from her. And how much more shall she love you, if you turn to her again? I tell you truly, very great is her love, greater than the greatest mountains, deeper than the deepest seas. And those who love her, their mother never deserts them. As the hen protects her chickens, as the lioness her cubs, as the mother her newborn babe, so does the earthly mother protect the Son of Man from all danger and all evils. And these too. And pray every day to your heavenly Father and earthly Mother, that your soul become as perfect as your heavenly Father's Holy Spirit is perfect, and that your body become as perfect as the body of your earthly mother is perfect. For truly, no one can reach the heavenly Father unless through his earthly mother. Even as no newborn babe can understand the teachings of his father till his mother has suckled him, bathed him, nursed him, put him to sleep and nurtured him. With that let us approach her. Her severed head. We shall certainly have fun in map reading our way around the ample curves of old Cerridwen, although I can start at no other place than that great head of the Isle of Anglesey, which although so obviously laughing, is nonetheless horribly severed at the neck by the watery Menai Strait. At first I did not feel there was any relevance in that watery slash of a neck, because the old girl's jollity was so overwhelming. But that was in the early days before I had discovered that such glaring strokes upon Albion's canvas are rarely made without significance. Delving for a reason, I found myself amongst the myths of ancient Egypt, where we shall find so many hints to Albion's mythological lineage as we progress on our journey. Anyway, a fragment from the affairs of the great goddess Isis and her son Horus caught my eye. Briefly, it transpires that in the midst of a mother and son tiff, Horus, in a fit of temper, cut off his mother's head. Fortunately, the two were soon reconciled, and by magic, so too was that precious head to its neck. On the face of it, there is no big revelation here, but I can't help wondering if this decapitation of the mother by the son should be read as a reflection of the sin all we sons of the mother commit daily against, not only her body, the earth, but also against that feminine or soul part of each of us. If so, does that lopped-off head of Isis poetically hint at what the land has made so exceedingly plain here? And when we too are hopefully reconciled with her, will the Menai Strait one day become dry land? Staying with that gash, another hunch has me tying my cheek while dwelling upon the name Menai. Now I don't know whether it translates into English, but what I do know is that as it stands the word men is most prominent within it, so could it be a tongue-in-cheek label to the effect that men did it to me? Is that nonsense? More than likely. Let's just forget I mentioned it. Enough speculation then, time now to focus on the details of this head that are beyond doubt, and are hammered into the map. For a start, just look at her chin hair at Abermanari Point and Landwin Island. Not even Arthur Rackham, the Edwardian children's book illustrator famous for witches and the like, could have drawn a finer set of old dame's whiskers. Look, too, and smile, at that cackling mouth that is formed by Maltreath Bay. The mouth is full of golden sand, with Maltreath itself acting as her tonsils. And oh how I'd just love to play with that name Maltreath by firstly separating mal with its English meaning to grind, and then cheekily swapping the ra in traith for an e, and thereby filling her mouth with the sound of grinding teeth, but I'll chicken out of that one too. Now come out of that toothless grin, and sail up past her hairy top lip to that lovely stub of a nose where a burfraw is the plug in her nostril. I hope she will forgive this intrusive tour of her anatomy, but I feel sure that she is chuckling at my rudeness, for she must have the earthiest sense of humor. So laugh again with her at the sight of that perfect wart which sprouts out of the bridge of her nose. Its name is Barclodiad y Gors, where a burial mound holds the decaying body and trappings of a Welsh chieftain. Perhaps his entombment in her wart was for once upsetting her in some way. Her forehead has Rosniger as her all-seeing third eye. Then it's on to the brim of her delightful hat, peaked at the front by Holyhead Mountain, where, as a youth, I found a strange ring that I still wear today on my wedding finger. It refuses to fit on any other. A lovely place to hide a ring. However, she has even more surprises in this, the most voluminous hat of all time, for at the very top of it squeak the islands of West and Middle Mouse. Why, even old Walt Disney couldn't have conjured up better tenants to take up residence in the hat of one who is the mother of all witches. But that's not the only play on words she has under her hat. Just around the inside of that bent-up front rim tip is Holyhead, the main port and town of Anglesey. How odd then that we should all persist in pronouncing Holyhead as Holyhead. Perhaps we do it out of guilt for our refusal acknowledging the existence of this, her head. Let us then pronounce it properly as Holy Head, for indeed it is. And there's more. The great center cone of her hat is tipped at the front by Carmel Head, and another name to conjure with. In my own head I hear the verses of the Bible Song of Solomon, a Song of Songs, though in my opinion here is no love duet between the black Shulamite, who the Bible claims represents the church as a bride, and her beloved, who is equated with Christ the bridegroom, but rather a dialogue of love between the goddess and her beloved consort, and, if true, it must also be the Song of Albion. Indeed, I'm not alone in thinking that something erotically pagan has crept past the Bible's editors. Hear what Robert Graves says of its verses. The fact is that originally they celebrated the mysteries of an annual sacred marriage between Salma, the king of the year, and the flower queen, And if that's true, too, then surely Albion must be their bridal bed. Indeed, just look what their lovemaking beneath those pastured sheets has created. But it gets better. The song takes the form of shared compliments between the two lovers, though excitingly many of these seem to extol topographical rather than human features. As a traveler of Albion, I'd strongly recommend reading it along the way, because it so often seems to be in curious harmony with the visual poetry we're walking on. For example, and especially for us now standing upon the mother's head, hear the beloved praise the beauteous head of his lover, the so-called Shulamite, in terms that can only be viewed as gigantic. Listen. Thine head upon thee is like Carmel. Mount Carmel, much mentioned in the Bible, is a prominent mountain in Israel, which stares out to sea near the port of Haifa. Just as Carmel head stares out to sea on this head of the mother, you get my drift. A head like Carmel, Carmel head, what more can I say? Is this coincidence or another case of hitting the nail bang on the head? The choice will always be yours, but for me even this stacking up of coincidences seems miraculous in itself. I mean to say, put that Carmel head on Virgo's knee, upon her breast, or smack in the middle of Sagittarius's forehead, and it would count for nothing, but placed here on the head of Albion's flower queen it is disarmingly relevant. Well, whoever named that Welsh headland, Carmel, must have been an avid Bible reader and wished only to bring a biblical place name to Wales. This explanation may well be the less than fantastic truth of the matter. Though why that Bible fanatic chose to bring Carmel to the actual head of Albion's own black Ian, Shulamite, and not, say, to her thumb or right nipple, is for me another case of man aiding the miracle underfoot. And whether or not he, like the many other provocative name-droppers on Albion, knew what he was doing, this same lady now doffs her great bonnet to him. Let us now finish the drawing of this bonnet. From point liners upon the rear corner of her hat center cone just sail on down into Red Wharf Bay and round past Penmon Priory, which tips the brim. Then just catch the poetically bloody tide past Beaumaris and back out through her throat to those hairs on her chinny chin. There I go again, forgive me, mother. To complete this awesome head, hear again her beloved sing out of the Song of Songs in topographical praise of her eyes. Thine eyes like the fish pools in Heshbon. Well, I dare say that there are fish, too, in the lake of Lyn Maelog that give Albion's Shulamite one sparkling green eye. Such is the delectable detail upon this bridal bed's coverlet of the heavens. Now for the prize at the end of her outstretched arm and hand, the prize, which must be Bardsey Island. Carnarvon marks the front of her neck, so just head west and let the coastline of Carnarvon Bay do the work of drawing her arm down to that lovely wrist at Neefin. From here the same coastline draws the back of her knuckled hand and that menacing finger, tipped as it is by break-why pull. Now we're in the palm of her hand, but there's a warning not to tarry long, for hell's mouth is written on the map. Get caught here and that's where you'll end up. Her wonderfully hooked thumb has its nail at Trwyn Silent. Then the handiwork of Tremedog Bay completes the underside of this arm to Porthmadog in her armpit. Sorry, Porthmadog. But look, her open hand has seemingly let go of her wheat sheaf, a sheaf that is now nowhere to be seen. Certainly her reflections at Glastonbury and Preseli each hold splendid examples of that ancient symbol of fertility. Thus the pathetic apology for such a symbol on Albion must be the minuscule Bardsey Island or Ynys Enley, as the Welsh call it, which lies just off the tip of her finger and to which she most obviously points. Sad or what? Albion seemed for the first time to have short-changed me. Maybe as an excuse, I could say that her sheaf has been threshed too many times by westerly gales and here's what's left. No, I wouldn't buy that either. So, grasping at straws, I phoned the Bardsey Island Trust and was told that there is evidence that the island was once larger than it is today, for the sea is in parts quite shallow around its coast, suggesting that there was once more dry land to be seen. Still pretty unconvincing? Tell me about it. There really was no concealing the fact that it seemed that instead of a whole sheaf, Albion had fobbed me off with no more than one measly single seed of Glastonbury and Preseli's glory. Somewhat peed off, I went back to the bookshelf to find what, if anything, Bardsey had going for it to make up for this disappointment. Indeed, the first serious disappointment I had had since embarking upon this madcap adventure. Anyway, things bucked up considerably, with a rush of adrenaline thrown in, when I found out that this tiny island was, supposedly, where Merlin now sleeps surrounded by the so-called 13 treasures of Britain. Not a bad resting place for this most famous of all wizards, I thought, for he was, indeed, surrounded here by these 13 zodiacal treasures of Albion. With this, I reminded myself that, as with her neck, nothing is for nothing on Albion, and because this whole miracle is obviously meant for our 21st century eyes, any shapes that once were visible, but aren't any longer, should really be of no consequence to us. Simply, and my line of thought seemed logical enough, because Albion had, up until now, never put a graphic foot wrong. Perhaps as far as this great zodiac is concerned, a wheat sheaf never had been intended as part of its overall message for this, its day of unveiling. I decided then to really scrutinize the actual shape of Bardsey, and things were primed to from miserable to quite bloody marvelous. My earlier jibe of a one measly seed was about to tie up in quite a remarkable way with something that was waiting to smack me right in the face. In short, I was about to see that we had in Bardsey something of far greater worth and relevance, for us living now, than a mouse-nibbled wheat sheaf. Magnifying glass in hand, I zeroed in on that tiny shape to which our pregnant Ceridwen is so vigorously pointing, and I emphasize that word pointing, for just look at that hand position, take an artist's word for it that his shape is not, and never was, intended for the actual holding of a flapping bundle of straw. In fact, when one looks very closely at the whole hand, we can further see that, not only is she pointing, but in the next movement about to pluck, or pinch, up the particle that is Bardsey Island between her forefinger and that dauntingly hooked thumb. Check out that face too. Full of cackling glee, isn't it? She must then, in that speck of Bardsey, have laid her piercing eye upon something far more wonderful and symbolic of fertility than a wheat sheaf could ever be. Indeed, I fancy she's trying to get us to look really closely at it, demanding we work out the riddle to which she so fervently points, a riddle she could only ever share at a time when men could see as minutely as she, via the eye of the microscope. What is more, if Merlin chose this tiny place, above all others in Albion's zodiac, in which to be enshrined, then the significant shape of Bardsey must be massively underlined as Merlin's personal gift to us who now peer at it with a new eye. Indeed, put that eye to a microscope and it will verify what our naked eye can now see for itself. Bardsey Island is one waggle-tailed sperm, the ultimate symbol of life and potent herald of new birth, that's what. Look at it yourself, turn that shape this way and that, but it can spell nothing else. A single precious seed is exactly what was intended all along. Thus life. 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 Is again proclaimed as the force behind our old mother's kicking up of her legs in a mighty jig of delight, for as old as she is and as many babes as she has given birth to, the sight of that glittering seed is the perpetual symbol of her union with her beloved, for while sperms still vibrantly swim, there will always be life and hope upon this blue orb. Indeed, that tiny seed is the most wonderful and holy thing in the universe. And if I have cracked the code of that shape, then how poetically breathtaking has the ancient sign of fertility been upgraded for us to see now, in a time when that most divine spark of all might be in its greatest peril. Indeed, is this the sobering reason behind the Earth Mother's pointing finger? However, I can see you want more proof. Because we're looking in mirrors, I now want to take you back to that archaic Welsh book, the Mabinogion, and in particular to the story of Ceridwen, the Welsh Earth Mother, and of her giving birth to the wizard Taliesin. In this we will find what is for me and my child within sparkling proof that we have, in Bardsey, found the seed of man rather than of wheat, and yet even these two shall become poetically one in the final analysis. Before we hear the tale, though, something more on the mysterious Taliesin, whose silver tongue we've already heard in Leo, singing of his knowledge of a lion in the landscape. On the face of it, Taliesin was a 6th century Welsh bard or wise man, but reckoned by some historians to spring from a much earlier time, some even equating him as possibly the physical truth behind the mythical Merlin himself. So is it Taliesin and not Merlin who is buried on Bardsey Island? Certainly, some of our earliest written poetry is attributed to this bard, poetry that to this day continues to smoulder within the pages of the Mabinogion. And why smoulder? Well, we've already had the description of a very topographical lion, And Taliesin seems to delight in taking other opportunities to hint at what can only be more of his knowledge of this great zodiac of Albion throughout his strange bardic verse. In one poem, the Hans Taliesin, for instance, he teases thus: I was with my king in the manger of the ass. I have been instructed in the whole system of the universe, I shall be till the day of judgment on the face of the earth. And I for one believe every word he said. Why? Because I have been myself in that same manger, indeed, millions this very night will sleep snuggled up to that same king. I'd better explain. We will learn later under Cancer, which is Albion's great all-enveloping arc, that hidden, and now almost forgotten, at the very heart of its heavenly constellation, is a cluster of faintly glowing stars which the ancients called the manger. To strengthen this hint of Bethlehem, this same cluster is also partnered on either side by two stars known affectionately as the donkeys. Thus Taliesin's riddle is perhaps not so outrageous after all, for his poetic meeting with the boy Messiah was not under Bethlehem's star, but must have been upon the land stars that stud Albion's constellation of Cancer, which, and as though to emphasize the bard's teasing words, has Gemini's holy Christ child sleeping as though in a manger, arguably at its very center. So do you get the picture? That Welsh wizard may well have been alluding to the fact that he had visited Albion's babe of hills and flowers, there lying in its manger of the Cancerian arc. But wait, could even his bardic cunning be double-sided? Could he also be, at the same time, hinting to an actual physical meeting with Jesus when that boy passed through these same green constellations? Anyway, time to hear now just how Taliesin acquired his wisdom in the first place, and as the Mabinogion, and indeed Bardsey Island give up their secrets, keep the pose of Albion's portrayal of Ceridwen in mind. Get ready to be delighted. Ceridwen once brewed a cauldron, grail, of inspiration, and from just a taste of its fabulous liquor one would know the mysteries of all things by becoming all things. And she herself, according to the books of astronomers, and in planetary hours, gathered every day the charm-bearing herbs, for this elixir. Anyway, she entrusted the job of stirring the cauldron to a little boy called Gwion, warning him never to taste the contents. However, and as you might expect, he did manage to taste 3 drops by accident, whilst Ceridwen was out gathering herbs. Seconds after Gwion had tasted the liquor the kitchen door flew open, Ceridwen had returned and saw instantly that mischief was about. In a flash the wrathful hag flew at poor little Gwion, and a fearful chase was on. Over hills and streams they fled, but because Gwion was himself now gifted in great wisdom, a grand game of wizardry versus witchery was to be played out. First, Gwion changed into a hare, but Ceridwen chased it as a greyhound. Next the boy, on reaching a river, became a fish, but she became an otter bitch, then he a bird and she a hawk, and just as she swooped down upon him for the kill, he saw below a heap of winnowed wheat in a barn and he dropped amongst it and became one of the grains. Not to be outdone, the wise woman became a black hen that immediately began to scratch at the grains, the way that only hens can, until she found the one with him in it, and promptly swallowed him. After 9 months Ceridwen gave birth to a handsome boy child, and being the mother of all mothers she could not find it in her heart to kill him, as I fear she originally had in mind to do. So she popped him in a leather bag and cast him into the sea. On May Eve the bag got caught in the fishing net spanning the weir of Gwydno Garanhi, a Welsh nobleman. The weir chronicled as being near the mouth of the river Dyfi. Elphin, Gwydno's son, was apparently not pleased to find there wasn't a single fish caught in the net, but, on untying the strange bag, was more than delighted for out jumped a child, not a bawling babe, but a small boy, full of fair speech and prophecy, and most beautiful to behold. Taliesin was the name they gave him, which meant radiant brow or shining forehead, obviously suggestive of his enlightened foresight. So, look at the cover. And because the look of any plant seed that has sent forth its initial taproot is not too dissimilar in shape to the shape of Bardsey Island, indeed to a human sperm, see following diagram, I ask you if this colossal picture of Wales is not a graphic reanimation of the above tale. There Ceridwen changed back from a black hen into her true shape, and just about to gobble up that grain containing Gwion the future wizard Taliesin. But here's something more before you make your mind up. No need for blushes, only another wow. First of all, and don't be shy, join me in putting a finger on Ceridwen's vagina, the portal place of love and birth of this Welsh giantess, the place where poetically so many babies' heads have popped out, along with roach and rowan trees, deer and dandelions, mountains and moths, and the rest of that paraphernalia of creation, her topographical yoni. Go to the line drawing and you can spot its inlet just above that raised-up knee, and just a few miles south of her distinctive belly button. Found it? It is the mouth of the River Dyfi, its birthing waters flowing directly from out of this Earth Mother's almighty womb. Remember that, after being thrown into the sea in a leather bag, the child floated into a netted weir. The exact location of that weir is not recorded in the tale but was said to have been somewhere between the mouth of the River Dyfi and Aberystwyth. Now if you look at any map of this area, irrespective of this landlady's bodily parts, you too may conclude that the most obvious place for that weir would be upon the River Dyfi itself, as between it and Aberystwyth there really isn't much river action at all, certainly none to match the splendor of the Dyfi. Thus, if I can persuade you to agree, watch again the land poetry confirm the legend, for if found on the Dyfi this divine child was indeed reborn in the salmon net which hung across Ceridwen's yoni, thus he was, in full topographical truth, reborn from out of the knowledge of this dancing goddess of valleys and mountains. Some, however, may say that my locating of Talison's rebirth at the mouth of the River Dyfi is taking a liberty, arguing that if that weir of Gwydno Garanhi had been on the River Dyfi it would have been jolly well stated as so in the Mabinogion. Fair comment. But time and myriad retellings of a myth can sometimes render actual locations a touch fogbound. That said, I also knew that if this weir were nowhere near Ceridwen's vagina, my tying up of this part of the tale to the landscape perhaps wouldn't have quite such a strong case. Of course, I could have left the matter shrouded in mist and therefore hedged the bets in favor of the Dyfi. That said, you must by now know that you're talking to Mr. Doubting Thomas himself, and, by Christ, he himself wanted convincing. So I went back to the Mabinogion and began trawling through the notes of Lady Charlotte Guest, the original translator of the texts. In her appendix to that tale of Talison's birth I found exactly what I needed to legitimately include this Dyfi, yoni theory in my book. This subsidiary tale has Talison, some time after his rebirth in Gwydno's weir, enjoying a spot of fishing from a coracle. However, an Irish pirate ship sails up alongside and abducts him. But Talison, while the pirates were at the height of their drunken mirth, manages to sneak back to his coracle. I will let Lady Guest tell you what happened next. He had no alternative but to be driven at the mercy of the sea, in which state he continued for a short time, when the coracle stuck to the point of a pole in the weir of Gwydno, Lord of Ceredigion, in Aberdyfi, and in that position he was found, at the ebb, by Gwydno's fishermen. Know that Aberdyfi is today's Aberdyfi, and Aberdyfi is the place that sits directly on the River Dyfi's yoni mouth, and with it I think the land's explicit picture has made its incredible point. Ceridwen's grain of truth. Talison's marvelous mythological conception and birth, and its message for us today, can now be seen to be unquestionably cast into the very fabric of his mother, the land, no more a tall tale but a gigantic physical and dancing truth. Again, see how Ceridwen's chase still goes gloriously on, watch her constantly reaching for that vital spark of life, yes, in the story a grain of wheat, but now metamorphosed for new eyes into a sperm. Both images hover within the mother's grasp as the one supreme logo of the wonder of life, yet which, at this very moment, hangs in the balance. For are we not altering the genetics of the wheat while tweaking the last drop of divinity out of the sperm? Thus, it seems there is no time left for riddles. Everyone must become an initiate of the truth of this earth and the gift of a life upon it before it is too late. Later, and far to the north on this vast zodiacal clock, upon a lonely moonlit bridge, we shall watch the joint symbolism of both sperm and grain flood as one in yet another glittering masterpiece of living land poetry. On this bridge, we shall again remember the knowledge won by the boy Gwayan and his lesson to us on how we, too, if we allow ourselves to be swallowed into the great mystery, may learn to glide with the fish, soar as birds, and with glowing brows, speak with fair speech and prophesy. After sacrificing ourselves by plunging into the deep guts or mystery of the Mother Earth, It is intended that we shall at the end of it rise to the dizzy heights of what shall be the full wonder of our own physical nature. This is charmingly signposted by taking a peep at the place name within her grasping claw-like hand, for in it is betrayed exactly where little Giant was also heading once given up to her clutches. It is Hell's Mouth, obvious portal to the underworld, and thus the beginning of that journey which can only be towards enlightenment and rebirth. And there should be no surprise that deep dark hell should be the initial starting place for one seeking to fly so high, for mythology is littered with heroes who also freely ventured through the jaws of the underworld to seek the crown of self-knowledge. They knew that before they could attain the spiritual heights, they must first experience their equally beautiful physical depths. And this plunge to the underworld was, I imagine, symbolic of the unrealized depths of one's inner self. It seems then for us accursed, but perhaps ultimately lucky ones, who are upon the brink, that this underworld, frightening to some, or inspiring to others, that forgotten plane of buried wisdom, is now brought to the surface in the shape of Albion. Its gates are thrown open to all, should we have the guts to walk through the wisdom of the past and into the future before the clock strikes 12. And if you still don't understand, hear your mother shout at you from out of that same hellishly beautiful mouth, listen. Giant, Taliesin, Merlin is still buried at the heart of that solitary grain of truth, just as the Bardsey legend says he is. So follow his lead, taste of my cauldron, this starry broth of Albion, and I'll chase you back through the memory of all you have lost. I'll run you as a hare, as a fish, and as a bird. I will chase you until you realize that you are all these things. Then, too, will your brow glow with the expanded perception that you are God. Never again will you injure this good earth, or indeed your fellow men. Simply, in Bardsey we are being permitted to see as the bard saw. Hellish, and yet the presence of the dove will mark the journey as holy. Before we journey around the rest of her lusciously swaying lumps and bumps, one last look at that river Dyfi, for I'd like to clinch its sacred place in the scheme of things. If I have rightly read its purpose in both Ceridwen's anatomy and the story of Taliesin's winning of wisdom, then we may not be pushing our luck in looking for its own personal mark of sacredness, for such a birthing water worthy of carrying Giant from dark womb to radiant rebirth, both in story and topographical fact, must be blessed in its own right with a resplendent signpost. We shall not have to look far, as the English name for this river is the Dovey, of course meaning dove. Then add to this the fact that Abba, as in a birdofi and a birdovi, means mouth, we suddenly get the message that Taliesin was born out of the mouth of the dove. That very bird which was the key, remember the Libran dove, to our, and perhaps his too, stepping through the door of Albion's underworld miracle. And as we add all this up, surely to our earlier musing upon the dove-encoded Oran or word of God, see Libra, begins to gel into even more significance. It seems then that our guiding dove has found yet another initiatory gate of rebirth through which to coo its glad tidings, to the effect that from out of some act of perfect harmony or balance, just perfect for Libra, has been born another wonder. Listening to it I cannot help but think, too, of the dove of the Annunciation, the one that signaled the birth of another divine child to another mother. But again, place this river of the dove but a few miles south and it would be pouring from her knee, and as a consequence totally invalidated for the purpose I have identified it for. Seeing it flow from her yoni, however, is another miracle amongst the many too many even at this still relatively early stage of our journey, I think, to argue away as a string of flukes. Defining the body. Let's now conjure around the rest of her, starting with those pendulous breasts. From Portmadog in her armpit, cross the estuary and sail down the descriptive coast to Barmouth, upon her stout and squared-off nipple. After Barmouth take either the A496, or a boat up the Afon Mordach to Laneltid and there complete the right breast. For the left one, start at Trawsfynd and head south on the A470, until it curls wonderfully with the waters of the Afon Nyon around the hamlets of Dolreid and Penswy Coed, upon the nipple itself, then continue with the A94 to Bala and completion. However, this left breast is not only drawn by roads as it can just as easily be more fluidly prescribed by Earth's own milk. From Trawsfynd then, take the River Eden. Intriguingly, a river of this same name draws virtually the entire right side of Albion's Christ, which outlines it down to Ganwood, and what a lovely river name by which to draw the milk and honeyed breast of the goddess. The rivers Mordach and Nyon then combine to draw the brilliantly pouting nipple. Simmer Abbey, like a child itself, suckles at this place. Lake Bala and several streams all then lend a hand in completing it. Thus the pair can be traced almost entirely by life-giving water. Note, find upon the right breast Harlech, where the severed head of Bran, C. Sagittarius, gave verbal succor to his people for a while. Belly laughs. From near that left nipple of Dolreid, cross the river and follow it out into Cardigan Bay, which draws her bulging belly down to Aberdyfi and its river Dyfi. Near Tywyn, though, do notice her water-filled navel, and hear another verse from the Song of Songs. Thy navel is like a goblet which wanteth not liquor, thy belly is like an heap of wheat set about with lilies. Song of Songs. Chapter 7 verse 2. That description of this Shulamite of the land is gorgeous, and so spot on. Wheat really does poetically fill her belly in that overlaid inference of little Gwion, himself encapsulated in a single grain, and who bulged her belly for 9 months. And look at her navel, just a little north of Tywyn, and it too wanteth not liquor, for being the largest body of water of any note in this area Broadwater has been scooped out like a dish, exactly where it should be, right in her navel, and is, imagine, replenished regularly by the river Dissany. Continuing from Tywyn, stay either on the A493, or opt for a coracle on the river Dyfi, and, heading upstream, imagine another journey in honor of Gwion's. Imagine taking a boat from Bardsey Island to Ceridwen's grasping fingers, then, as the name in the palm of her hand suggests, on into her mouth. Thereafter on land, sliding down her gizzard and into her vast domed belly and then out again with the flow of the Dyfi above. What a wonderful circular journey it would be, as is life itself. For now, though, just take note that by going up the ditty we have poetically been within the womb of the mother. Her heart, by the way, I would like to think is the magnificent Mount Snowdon, the highest peak in this entire land zodiac. Ceridwen really does not end here, though, as to my artist's eye there seems such a strong case to see 2 brilliantly proportioned legs daintily skipping to some dance of creation, revealing not only a pair of lovely knees but stockings too. While on her feet we'll find what appear to be clogs. The detail really astounding. Upon her knee sits Taliesin. Incidentally, I found that on her left knee's the legendary last resting place of her son Taliesin, fittingly called Bed Taliesin. Though mythologically speaking, perhaps he only sat here to lay his head against the mother's breast while she sang to him of the mistines of stars, snowdrops, sperm and of all else. There is certainly a magnificent view of his birthing river Dyfi from here. Indeed, I saw it for myself on a sultry July evening, the Dyfi glowing with the color of beaten copper. My family and I had found my old friend's bed, a domed pillow of earth set amid a sea of sweet-smelling new-mown hay. Propped up, an unspectacular slab marks the spot, though a curious sense of smiles upon the air more than compensates. At the edge of the mound grew just one clump of exquisite harebells, each bell was of that rarest blue, all except for one bell, for on the same stem as the blue there hung a bell of purest white. On the crown of the mound itself clung a solitary spray of English stonecrop, tiny white 5-point stars, a constellation for him whose life I know turned, and still turns, with this zodiac underfoot. Silently I thank that old seer for the blazing comet trail that he has left behind him upon Albion's starry wheel. Without him I would have been lost many times. As we left I laid upon his stab a farewell bunch of foxgloves in acknowledgement of his charming cunning. Now for those jigging legs. First, though, the rippling hem of her dress, that flies high in the whirl of her jig. Start at the mouth of the river Dyfi and head inland. At Glandify follow the county sign between Dyfed and Powys south and you'll see what a beautiful rippled hem it makes as it lifts over her raised knee. Continue following it until it passes over the river Wyarlt. Now it's the country road to Rada, here picking up the A44 to cross her right knee to Crossgates, in the bend of that knee. We're still following its ripple as we continue with the A44 to Walton. Here we pick up the border line between Powys and Shropshire plus Old Offers Dyke, which again we find lending a hand in defining a giant. Follow this route north to Llangedwin and on to the south of Oswestry, where the county line and the many waterways that separate Powys from South Clwyd unite to carry the rush of it away towards Taurus. Note, if you wanted to be naughty, the road from Llandifai right through Caersws, and then beyond through Newtown and Welshpool, thereafter joining the county boundary to Llanymynech, gives us an alternative hem line and an altogether more risque garment. And the high-stepping left leg. Start at Caersws on the A470 just west of Newtown. Head west and join the flow of both the A489 and the River Dyfi at Eglwysfark. On her knee, the road becomes the coastal A487, and this, with the sea on your right, takes you down to Aberavon at the start of her clog. From here just follow the coast down to Gwybert on her toe. The River Tyfi from Gwybert fluently shapes the sole through to Lampeter upon her heel. Across country now to draw her calf muscle, so pass through Llangeitho, Ysbyty, Ystwyth, Devil's Bridge, and Pontywydd in the bend of her knee. If you go from here to Aberystwyth, you'll have drawn her stocking top. Back at Pontywydd, it's now the A44 to Llangerig, from where the A470 will take us back to where we started at Caersws. Her right thigh starts at Llangerig. Head south on the River Wye that, faultlessly, draws her bump of a knee around Gwastadin Hill, then tumbles down her shin to Lyswen. Now the A478 takes over and takes us south to Trey Tower, and on up to Talabont on Usk at the start of her clog, so we can follow the shape of the Talabont Reservoir. Cross now the Tarfetian River before crossing over the A470 to join the A4059. Follow this road around the toe of her clog and look for the A465 through Merthyr Tydfil to Abergavenny on her heel, after which go a few more miles on the A465 to just past Ponday, where you'll pick up Offers Dyke, yet again, to Newchurch on her calf. From Newchurch, I'm sorry it's a touch of artist's license here, take a short hike across country so as to make contact with the A44, then on to Crossgates in the bend of her knee. The A483 will now easily finish this leg off to Newtown. Oh, and I nearly forgot that the River Severn from Newtown to Welshpool washes the curve of her bottom. Sorry, Mum. Stand back and look at her, an explosion of the spice of life. Her animated proportions designed not to cause a hush, but a rousing, yeah. One last look into her face, and there detect another flicker of pain. Having now danced ourselves around her lovely figure, we should, I guess, be left with a lingering smile, but for me it doesn't linger long. You see, I can't help going back to that face where I fear there is as much pain as there is delight. Her head, you see, although now known as the Isle of Anglesey, was once called Mona, another enigmatic lady if ever there was one. However, in this Welsh lady's case Mona was, I believe, pronounced as Moony. And rightly so, for what could be more feminine than the moon to light that face, her very own celestial bauble, which, for age upon age, has been seen as so intimate to the mother and womanhood the world over. Indeed, remember that it was its very phases that inspired our ancestors to visualize their triple-faced goddess, so how beautifully apt it was to have her face signed as Moony. Again, another slice of sublime coincidence. And the pain? Well, it was to her Moony head that the last of the Druids fled, pursued by the Roman legions under Suetonius, in AD 61. His legions crossed the Menai Strait and put not only those old men to the sword, but I sense beheaded the mother religion of this land at the same time. On that day upon the very head of the moon goddess was the holy feminine force historically put to the sword, a blow perpetuated, perhaps, with each ride that spills through the Menai Strait. Smiles, however, are never far away on Albion, for even in the silence of the above discovery I couldn't help a smile, albeit an ironic one, at this disarming expertise of the land in recording events both mythological and historical. This last passionate flight of the mother's sons could have been to anywhere, to the head of Taurus, to the fist of mighty Sagittarius, even to the heart of the Unicom, but as any frightened children would, they sought the soothing words of their mother. True, their flight was in vain, yet what better death for them than at their mother's lips? So uncanny this, that one cannot help but muse whether those Druids knew exactly where they ran to. Whatever, on that fateful day, the mother and her followers melted into Albion's every sod, into every acorn, into every grain of wheat, and into everyone who has ever since filled with untranslatable longing, or even tears, at the sight of any one of nature's myriad wonders. I hope, for you, Albion comes to break your heart with similar bliss. Lastly, a confession. Hugh spotted her before me. Whilst working in his studio in Carnarvon upon the throat of Ceridwen, Hughes returned from an artist's reverie upon a map of his own locale and produced, just for fun mind, a rendering of what his sudden insight must have shown him. When more than 100 years later I saw what he'd done, it had me thumping the air and under my breath shouting, yes. For my own artist's eye, let alone my sanity, had there and then been totally vindicated. So, I am now immensely glad to announce that I am not the first to see Anglesey as the bonneted head of an old lady, or the bulk of Wales as the rest of her body. It came about like this. Back in my writing up of Sagittarius, my research had taken me one Saturday morning into the cloistered and cavernous silence of London's Map Library part of the British Museum, itself embedded in the great thumping heart of that particular giant. There I was then, smiling from ear to ear at the antique artwork before me in the shape of the already reproduced illustration entitled Geography Bewitched. See Sagittarius. Of course, I was amazed, but delighted too. For I had in Robert Dighton found another who had also seen the beginning of Albion, albeit whimsically misread. However, my smiles were soon to be sucked back in with a sharp intake of breath as out of the library's vaults, and delivered to my quiet corner by the helpful, though unexcitable staff member, who had no idea what he had unearthed, came an even more astonishing picture by yet another artist whose eyes had seen exactly as mine had. In front of me now was ceremoniously placed a virtual replica of my Virgo, the only difference being that Hugh, using perhaps the less than perfect maps of his time, had not seen her dancing nakedness, so had properly clothed her from head to toe. Oh, and another thing he did was to make her boobs become her belly, and her belly her knees, while Taurus he saw as no more than a sack upon her back. But her whole head and bonnet was a perfect mirror image of that which hung on my own studio wall. Her outstretched arm was also exactly as I'd seen, although the artist had not made use of the coastal promptings to pronounce that hooked finger and thumb, again perhaps only owing to poor map reference. Interestingly, though, he had for some reason felt compelled to weave a strange and ghostly menagerie of all manner of creatures into her clothes, including goats, dogs and rabbits, half hidden amongst the shadowy folds. Which like he had certainly made her, and in whose demeanor one cannot help but catch the scent of Ceridwen herself. Needless to say, I was, and still am, thrilled by her company. But John may have beaten the pair of us. For the last piece of overlapping imagery, I'd like you to now try to see through the revelation-filled eyes of John. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Revelation, chapter 22, verse 2. Surely in heaven's name this island, this New Jerusalem, this entire earthly zodiac, is she the bride of God adorned in a gown of heaven's constellations, sewn together by Britain's spring-flowering hedgerows? Is this John's revelation made breathtakingly physical? We now go east, towards the bellowing bull of Taurus. Virgo. What a colorful geologically grinning mask our mother wears, aptly swiped by so many sedimentary warpaint-like streaks. Or is it more akin to those strangely terrifying masks seen flitting along the canals of Venice in the dusk of their somewhat eerie yet enchanting when for a few hours something gorgeously supernatural stalks the laughing throngs? How Ceridwen would love to shape change to her heart's content amongst them. However, also note how the riotousness of those sedimentary eddies suddenly slow and spiral more placidly around the area of her right breast. Time for peace and contentment?